Business and unions negotiate deals ahead of tomorrow's Jobs and Skills Summit. Woodside Energy's huge profit and payout to shareholders, and why cosmetic injections like Botox boomed during the pandemic. It's Wednesday, the 31st of August, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, you know how Fear and Greed is on all kinds of social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're even on TikTok, believe it or not. But anyway, the purpose of this is, you know how we're on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So yesterday, a very interesting tweet by a listener to Fear and Greed, but also a kind of a regular guest, really, Sherelle Murphy, who is the chief economist at EY, and we speak to her quite regularly, and she's always a great person to talk to. Anyway, she tweeted yesterday and she said, "Ladies, I'm shocked to learn that by far the majority of Fear and Greed listeners are men. This is a quality business podcast, entertaining, and I guarantee you will learn something useful ahead of the workday. Get onto it," she said. And which is a fantastic kind of endorsement, but it is true, isn't it?
It is true that most of our listeners are men, and we have struggled with how we change that. And maybe in using people like Sherelle helping us out, that's actually how we do it.
Absolutely. And so I just thought it was a really interesting tweet, fantastic, and we really appreciate Sherelle endorsing us like that. But and please, if you'd like to do the same and get some friends on board to Fear and Greed, we really do appreciate the support. And we've got an interesting chat coming up today as well, Sean, with Dr. Jackie Fairley, who is the CEO of Star Pharma.
Yes. Now, this Star Pharma, of course, is a biotech company, a successful Australian biotech company, and it has a number of products which we talk about. I've got to say, this was a 101 for me because some of the products that they're developing are really ahead of the curve. The one that I really liked talking to Jackie about was a product which actually helps other drugs work in more specific areas of the body. So it's kind of a delivery mechanism for more specific areas of the body. So if someone takes a drug, it doesn't affect the whole body. It primarily affects the part that needs being helped. Really fascinating chat.
Yeah, it sure is. It's a bit later on. But the main story this morning, Sean, we can get ready now for 3 days of talk about jobs and skills with the summit starting tomorrow, and plenty of pre-summit deals are already being negotiated.
There's so much discussion about potential changes and agreements between business and unions that I reckon it's pretty hard to keep track of. Certainly, expectations are high as we enter the summit. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese needs some concrete agreements or decisions over the next couple of days to show that the summit isn't just a talk fest. And so far, it is certainly promising. Mr. Albanese hopes of near consensus at the summit, that's what he says, and he's unashamedly pro-business and pro-workers.
So you mentioned that there's obviously a lot going on, hard to keep track of, but what do we know so far?
Okay, so Education Minister Jason Clare yesterday hinted at visa extensions for international graduates as a way of addressing the skills shortage. Students might be able to stay for up to 4 years after completing education. He's also looking at changing the model for short courses at universities to encourage people to take up that option. The Australian Council of Trade Unions, the ACTU, and Council of Small Business Organisations Australia, otherwise known as COSBOA, those two groups reached a memorandum of understanding on Monday to support multi-employer agreements to simplify workplace rules, as well as a simpler test for enterprise agreements. While the Labor government highlighted the deal between the ACTU and COSBOA, other business groups were, let's say, less enthusiastic about the whole multi-employer agreement idea. There are also media reports that the Business Council of Australia and the ACTU are looking at an agreed statement of principles for workplace relations. Now, certainly the two sides are working together, which is good. If they came up with some sort of agreed statement of principles for workplace relations, it would set the ground rules, the parameters for how negotiations go, and that would be a great thing.
Yeah, it sure would. Away from business and unions, I can imagine that a summit like this would see plenty of others all pushing their proposals as well.
That's right. Victorian Labor Premier Daniel Andrews, for example, is pushing for greater flexibility to employ people, highlighting that older people could be in the workforce but are penalised via reduced pension payments if they do. Something needs to be done about that, Mr Andrews says. New South Wales Liberal Premier Dominic Perrottet is keen for movement on permanent residency to help domestic workforce gaps identified by states. His Treasurer Matt Keane is pushing for seniors to fill vacancies in home care, hospitality and agriculture. All sorts of ideas. Of course, then there's plenty of interest groups and individual businesses putting forward their 2 cents worth, mostly around skills and migration. A couple of the more interesting ones, Atlassian co-founder Scott Farquhar says businesses like his software group should be rewarded with the ability to more readily bring in skilled migrants in return for training more Australians to become high-paid tech workers. And the boss of Link Group was interesting. Now, Link owns a big chunk of conveyancing company PEXA. He reckons migration will help the housing market as rates rise. All self-interested, but that's fair enough. No arguments there. Anyway, it goes on and on.
Absolutely. It's going to be a very big few days and we'll make sure we have everything here. What happened on local markets yesterday?
S&P ASX 200 closed up 0.5% to 6,998 points. It was pretty broad-based rally, really. Tech stocks had another good day, as did energy companies. Only the materials companies went backwards. Among the top 20 stocks, WiseTech Global jumped more than 4%. Woodside and Santos did well after a bumper profit from Woodside. More of that shortly. And South32 rose 2%. Otherwise, there really wasn't much going on among the large caps. Get away from the large caps, though, Michael. Plenty going on. So imaging and pathology group Helios' share price jumped 3.5% after it doubled underlying net profit. Now, Helios is a major provider of COVID testing, so you'd expect it to do well. Another interesting one, luxury goods retailer Setai's share price tumbled 18% after saying it had burnt through cash last year and will delay its launch into China. Of course, Setai had been a share market darling. We've spoken a bit about Bubs Australia, the infant formula maker. It posted record revenue driven by strong growth in China and the United States. Remember, Joe Biden, the president, talked about Bubs Australia providing infant formula in the US as a result of some contamination in US-made formula. All that's great, but at the end of the day, it made a net loss and its share price closed down 5%. A few other quick ones. Sandfire Resources lost nearly 4% after ditching dividend payouts. Hello World Travel's share price rose more than 5% after it narrowed its full-year loss. Software group Bravura lost 8% on its announcement. And Link Group, which is about to be acquired by Canadian company Dye & Durham, announced a net loss of $57 million for the year. Whew, plenty in that.
There sure is. Just on the Bubs Australia, how does that work when they've had such a cracking year in terms of the expansion into the US and into China and yet still come out with a net loss? Does it largely relate to the cost of actually expanding and having to scale up production and get into those new markets?
Yes, but in that case, there was some changes in equity arrangements for the company. So that triggered a change in shareholdings, which actually altered the bottom line result. So it probably wasn't as bad as what it sounds like if it hadn't had that equity arrangement change.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Put you on the spot there a little bit, didn't I?
You did.
I like to keep you on your toes. All right. What's happening in global markets?
There's been some pretty decent moves in commodity markets over the past 48 hours. Iron ore futures have fallen below $100 a tonne. That took some of the big materials companies here like BHP and Rio lower. The market really is dominated by sentiment around China and just how much steel it's going to make, and that's a bit negative at the moment. European natural gas and power prices tumbled around 20% after Germany said its stores are filling up faster than planned. Of course, European gas prices have been at record levels. That's really good news. There's also good news for the Aussie dollar. It bounced back above 69 US cents. There's some bad news for petrol buyers, though, with Brent crude rising again to be trading above $100 a barrel.
All right, so we should probably fill up soon then.
Well, yes, but I'm sick of predicting because, sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong.
I'd just like you to state your case very clearly so that if you are in fact wrong, I have something to pin you on.
Fair enough.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Woodside Energy has delivered a massive profit, up more than 400% and tripled its half-year dividend.
It's a big one, thanks to soaring LNG prices and a contribution from the old BHP Petroleum, which merged with Woodside in a $63 billion deal earlier in the year. Michael, the numbers are enormous. Revenue came in at close to $6 billion up from $2.5 billion. Net profit was more than $1.6 billion up from $300 million. Now, its share price closed up 1.5%, although it was up 3% at one point, and it was the highest close since 2019. Now, Chief Executive Meg O'Neill said volatile energy markets had demonstrated the importance of gas in the world's energy mix. Gas makes up about 70% of Woodside's portfolio. It is a really big result, but then Ms. O'Neill was going through some of the spending that's going to be going on over the next couple of years, and the investment is just huge. So by the end of 2024, Woodside expects to spend about $9 billion on major projects, including Scarborough and Pluto 2 in Western Australia and the Sangomar oil project in Senegal. So it is a big result, but then again, they spend a lot of money too.
Yeah, big numbers all around, really.
Yep.
Now, Sean, the state premiers, or at least some of them, and the feds are slowly, it seems, moving into line around dropping quarantine times for COVID patients.
The National Cabinet meets today, and it looks like the isolation period for COVID-positive people will drop from 7 to 5 days. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet has been pushing hard on that for a few days now. Yesterday, Victoria's Daniel Andrews said he was open to updated advice. So that sort of suggests that maybe he's thinking about it too. Haven't heard from Western Australia's Mark McGowan on this one, though. Just put that in context. The two East Coast premiers, though, were speaking at a rare joint announcement, which established 25 new urgent care services across the two states.
Okay, Sean, very interested to hear what you make of this one. Almost a quarter of retirees will die with as much money in super as when they entered retirement.
Perhaps the most difficult question for someone that's just started retirement is how much can I spend every week or every month or every year? Now, a survey from National Seniors and Annuity Provider Challenger of more than 3,000 retirees shows that 23% want to live off earnings rather than spend their capital, that initial lump sum. About half want to preserve at least some of the capital. Now, reasons range from leaving money to the kids through to making sure they've got enough money in case of medical or aged care costs. Whatever the reason, though, it's a huge pool of money not being spent. It used to make more sense when we didn't have a superannuation scheme, but now most people that retire from now on will have some sort of lump sum. So the whole idea of passing the intergenerational wealth isn't as relevant because people retiring from now on will actually have money themselves. Anyway, it's a bit of a conundrum, which if we could unlock that pool of money to be spent, and, I think most retirees deserve a comfortable retirement if they can, then you're going to have a lot more spending in the economy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Now, there's a boom in pub sales at the moment with the Kingscliff Beach Hotel, which is on the New South Wales side of the Queensland border, going up for sale with this is pretty incredible, with an expected price tag of $100 million.
Have you been there?
I haven't, actually, no.
It's a cracking pub. It's the mainstay of the town. It's Kingscliff. It runs along the beach there. It is truly one of the great pubs.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah. But there's been a bunch of big sales recently. So the Oaks Hotel in Sydney's Neutral Bay, which is iconic in that city, it's up for sale for about $175 million. Now, that would be a national record if it gets that much. The Longy, to we locals, the Longville Hotel, which is close to the Oaks, it's in Lane Cove in Sydney, it sold for $50 million. And according to the Australian, the Imperial Hotel in Noosa is up for sale with a $20 million price tag. So pubs are up for sale and people are happy to pay up for them.
Yeah, certainly seems that way. Now, this is a serious story, this one, Sean. Australia's E-Safety Commission has issued legal notices to some of the big tech companies to disclose how they're dealing with the proliferation of child sexual exploitation material.
Apple, Meta, Microsoft and Snap have all received a notice. The commissioner, Julie Inman Grant, said no one has put pressure on the big companies to find out what they are and are not doing about this incredibly serious problem. Companies that do not respond to the notices within 28 days could face financial penalties of up to $555,000 a day. Not saying that any of these companies are doing anything wrong, but certainly they do have a responsibility to let the E-Safety Commission know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese might be sticking to the plan to introduce so-called stage 3 tax cuts in 2 years' time, but, Sean, there is plenty of pressure on him to drop them.
It's really an odd world when politicians are calling on the government to reverse already legislated tax cuts. What's going on?
That is actually a bit strange when you put it like that.
The Greens have calling from it. Some of the Libs have called for it. Very unusual. Now, the reason is because the tax cuts will cost more than $243 billion over 10 years. And the budget deficit, thanks to COVID, is huge. Also, these stage 3 tax cut benefits mostly go to the rich. The legislated change scraps the 37% tax bracket for those earning above $120,000. So the new tax bracket would cut in at $200,000. Yesterday, the Parliamentary Budget Office released costings that show 48% of the benefits go to those earning more than $180,000 a year. Hence the call for the Prime Minister to scrap them.
Now, Sean, we mentioned this one at the top of the show. Times might be tough, obviously, with the cost of living rising, but it doesn't seem to have discouraged people from having cosmetic injections and beauty treatments.
That's the takeout from Silk Laser Australia's results yesterday. Now, Silk Laser runs 127 outlets across the country. After announcing a 27% jump in profit for the last financial year, Chief Executive Martin Perlman said sales are up again since 1 July, and that's after Silk lifted prices by up to 8% to claw back higher input costs. In the injectables category, think Botox, Silk Lasers had a record month in July. And Mr. Perlman said his customers would forgo a new jacket before they forgo treatment. But here's the bit I really like. Silk Laser benefited from people spending more money on personal grooming during COVID-19 because of a phenomenon known as Zoom face. I kid you not. Thing is, we all know exactly what Mr. Perlman's talking about, don't we?
We do. And is this why you always leave your camera off whenever we have
always
a digital meeting, Sean?
I hate my Zoom face. And apparently I'm not alone.
A nasty case of Zoom face today. All right, moving on to overseas news now. And Solomon Islands has temporarily suspended all naval visits by the US as relations continue to deteriorate between Washington and the Pacific nation.
It comes after a US Coast Guard cutter received no response from Solomon's authorities when it requested permission to stop and refuel at the Pacific nation on August 23. Relations between Solomon Islands and the US have deteriorated since the unexpected announcement in April that the Solomons had signed a security pact with the Chinese government. It was the first such agreement in the region and a major diplomatic win for Beijing.
The US Justice Department has completed its review of potentially privileged documents seized from former President Donald Trump's Florida estate this month and has identified a, quote, limited set of materials that potentially contain attorney-client privileged information.
Bit of a disappointment that there's not more, really. I mean, given all the noise about the raid and search of Mar-a-Lago, it just seems there wasn't anything too juicy in the documents after all, Michael.
Yeah, it kind of seems that way. And Gautam Adani, the Indian coal mine owner who was a college dropout, has become the third richest person in the world, Sean, with a fortune of $137 billion US.
Yes, now the Adani name is well known in Australia because of the Adani-owned coal mines in Queensland that played such a role in the election before last. Mr. Adani first tried diamond trading before turning to coal, is now behind only Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos on the Bloomberg billionaires list. He's the richest Asian ever, and rising coal prices have pushed his wealth above LVMH's Bernard Arnault and Microsoft's Bill Gates. Mr. Adani's empire ranges from coal to media and data centres. Now, he's pledged to invest $70 billion in green energy to become the world's biggest renewable energy producer. I suppose you can do that when you're worth $137 billion US and the third richest person in the world.
Yeah, I suppose you can. All right, big day today. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Dr. Jackie Fairley, the CEO of Star Pharma.
Get ready for a lesson in medicines and how they are delivered in the body. That's what I say about that one.
All right, it is coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 31st of August, 2022, the last day of winter. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.